Hello, and welcome to Turkish Film's Daily Chess Analysis. This is episode 20. So here was the game that I played that got me to 1700. I was very happy with this. So a note on the opening. It went d4, knight f6, knight f3, and this is actually, in the game, I had stated that I thought this didn't have much bite, but this is actually the regular way to get into the London system, as the computer says. I've always known the London system to be d4 and the bishop comes out immediately, but I guess the move order isn't any different. Although, I think with the other move order, I'm not sure. This gets you closer to castling, which is nice. Okay, d5, a totally normal move. Bishop f4, he's playing the London system. c5 is a good response. I actually learned this, I first was exposed to this, I think, by Eric Rosen. So shout out to Eric Rosen. But then later I did some analysis on my own in this position. Knight c6, I liked this a lot. And it's actually pretty funny. There was a game that was played by Eric Rosen without knight f3, with instead the person played bishop d3. And he punished them by playing c4, and their bishop went back. And then everything else normal happened. But then, upon queen b6, queen c2 could be met by bishop f5. And it was a lot of complications there. Anyway, this is a different position. So queen b6, queen b3. And in this position, I don't want to take here because it would develop his rook for free. But now I can play c4. A move that normally is kind of scary to play. You don't really want to push your pawn past when they haven't moved their, fianchetto pawns, because they can always just break down the structure. So it's kind of risky to do this. It does stop the bishop, but it's just a little bit too extended. Also, notice that we're going to have a light squared pawn chain here, so this bishop's going to be suffering for a lot of the game. This is kind of like a hatch pawn. Either this stays back and your bishop can, go freely between, or you close the hatch and the bishop kind of suffers. But with c4, really there's not a better move. Like here it says queen c2, bishop f5. We can transpose back into that line. So the best move here is to take, and takes back. And now the plan, at least as I have understood it and have been playing it, is you have two b-pawn bullets here. You throw those up there. It's kind of like a minority attack, creating a weakness out of the c3 pawn is the intention. And so to combat that, the computer recommends here playing knight to a3, stopping this. And this is kind of a weird square for the knight, but it does do a good job at this. And the computer, when I was first looking at it, went back and forth between bishop f5, a totally normal developing move, also contacting this, tender point that we have, vastly restricting this bishop over here, and playing knight to a7, insisting I want to push my b-pawns, which is kind of funny. Okay, but in the game he played knight bd2, also a totally normal regular move. It just doesn't address my b-file stuff. I'm not used to saying b-file. It's normally c-file. He tried a3 to stop my pushes, I guess, and I pushed anyway. Here's a computer values development a little bit more. cb4 and my knight captured with a threat. And now here's the major turning point, a very critical point in the game. If we look, very critical. Rook c1. Totally normal move. Getting out of this pin, so my knight has to go back. And rook c1, knight c6 is how the game should have continued. There is material equality in this position. We can see that white has 4 pieces developed to black's 3 pieces, right? White has 2 moves to castle, where black has 3 moves to castle. But on the queen side, there's this pawn, which could be a little bit dangerous. I have the open line here, so that pawn can't move. And my b-pawn, again, is coming up the board. So it seems sort of balanced in that way, because white has so much more development than black. But black actually has kind of a free hand on the queen side. And you could imagine that, I don't know, after some regular series of development, we could see the rooks ending up here, and pawns flying, and a passed pawn being created here, which I think it gets created by force. And so you have to be a little bit careful here as black. That's how the game should have gone. Instead, my opponent, after bishop captures b4, long castled, which I thought definitely couldn't be very good. But I thought here for a little bit. And I said, okay, well, my knight's attacked. That's for one. So I could move my knight, that's for sure. Right? I could move it backwards somewhere. But I kind of have my pieces already at him, and he seemed to castle into the open lines and into a lot of stuff. Also, since this bishop hasn't developed yet, this bishop that normally goes to d3. Whoops. Since this bishop can't go to d3, this diagonal's open, right? And then I noticed, aha, this is one of my checks, and the king's only legal moves are light squares. So if I can find a move that contacts these two squares, then bishop a2 would, or knight a2 would be mate. Then I see, aha, bishop f5 does that. And then I start calculating bishop f5 and see that, okay, if bishop f5 and he takes, rook a1's pretty good because he has no legal moves but to give back the knight. So it really isn't a piece sacrifice. These pawns would be terrible. Also, he'd be losing some pawns along the way. And so I went for it, bishop f5. Very happy with myself. In this position, the computer says bishop f5 is winning by 2. Every other move is just winning by 1 or less. So bishop f5 really is a very important move in this position here. Wait, is bishop f5 the critical moment? Bishop f5 is the critical moment, not the long castling. That's pretty funny. Okay, so I found a really good move. You're just letting the piece hang, but it's not really hanging. But here I had a little bit to calculate, and to be honest, I didn't calculate as well as I should have. I saw that e4 was an issue because you're blocking the bishop, right? So there's no more mate. But I assumed that I could just take with the pawn, attacking this knight, and then have maybe discoveries or something, which is inaccurate. So after he played e4, I would have had to calculate a lot more than that. Yeah, so in the game, he played a captures b4. It's a blunder. And now I'm winning by 9. You're just letting... It's like he castled on the queen side, which is already a stretch because he doesn't have any pawns there. And then he doubled the pawns there and opened a file towards his king, while his king has no legal moves. Not very smart. So check, I take it, so I'm not down a piece anymore. King d2, rook captures b2 seemed good. Knight captures e4 seemed okay as well. It seemed like a lot to calculate. So rook captures b2, and here I actually made a blunder, which I was kind of upset with afterwards. I just took the pawn, establishing that I have a 2-pawn advantage. Also, I mean, nothing stopping that pawn like ever, so I was pretty happy with this position. It actually isn't so great, but he played the correct move here of rook a1, and I traded rooks because that rook was a little bit too annoying. He played king d2, trying to win a pawn. Does that win a pawn? Let's see. If I just play a regular move, yeah, bishop captures c4 wins a pawn. Because if I take back, then he takes over here. Okay. But king d2, I played bishop a2 instead of bringing my knight in the game. Bringing my knight in makes a lot more sense, actually. Yeah, it's not a big difference. And he played knight e5 and then resigned. And I thought maybe is there like some mega winning tactic here? My knight does get in the game, and you got to be a little bit sensitive of your pawns, right? Like if he goes back this way, he loses the rook, for example. And if he saves it like this, the computer's really addicted to this f6 move. I mean, f6, g5 is horrible for why I'm just pushing him totally back. Okay, back to the game. I'll go over with rook captures b2, or rook captures b4. The reason this is a blunder is because e5 is really strong. And the idea is I want to have more pieces in the attack. We can say that's in the attack, and that's in the attack. The magic number is 3. So let's get a third piece in the attack, and we can see that pawn is hanging with check after this move. So you have to choose which one to save. And if you save the bishop, bishop captures b4 check. Let's say he blocks like this. The computer said knight captures, or knight to e4, putting more pressure on this guy. And after f3, which is totally reasonable, bishop captures d2. If the king moves, that's not going to fly. I'm sure there's mates here. Oh, here we just can win the rook by force. After knight to c3 check. Is there a mate? There's a mate. Knight c3, king has to go here. Knight captures d1 check. Oh, that's so brutal. And if you go back to the corner, That's checkmate. That's really sad. And so instead, let's say he comes closer. How does he survive? Here will lose the knight. So knight c3. And if he repeats, still bishop captures e3. King captures e3. And knight d1 is mate. The pawn is guarding the escape square. I always like it when there's checkmates with no pawns in the squares around the king. But it's still checkmate anyway. Those are just really pretty to me. Yeah, so rook captures b4 misses out on a lot of these opportunities to bring more pieces into the attack. That's why it's a blunder, because it loses 6 points of value. But I mean, I went from ultra super mega swiftly winning to winning, and I'm confident that I could win this position, just with these mega pawns here and being up 2 pawns. Yeah, okay. So let's go back to the position where he blundered with a captures b4. And let's look at the issues he could have posed. So like I said, if he wastes a turn, like h3, knight a2 is checkmate. It's checked by the knight, and he can't go anywhere. So he's got to adjust knight a2 at least in this position. Or the bishop. And so the first guess was, what about e4? Another one is rook to e1. So if knight a2, he has an escape square. That's another option the computer gave. And the last one it gave was knight b1, but I mean, that move looks kind of crazy. I mean, because after this, he has to go to king d2, and I don't think you want I don't think you want a castle queenside just to come back. I don't know. It just seems like an odd maneuver. He could have just brought his rook over in one move instead of wasting 1, 2, 3 moves. So I wouldn't really consider knight b1 here. If he played it though, I'd have to calculate it for sure. The one I was looking at is e4, so let's start off with rook e1. So rook e1 does 2 things. One, it stops that from being checkmate, because the king has now escaped square. But also, in a lot of lines, when the rooks are like this, the f2 pawn, which is currently undefended, lands a fork. So he's kind of getting out of the fork as well as making that escape square. And here, even though my knight's attacked, he can never take it after my e-pawn moves, which is why before rook captures b4 was a blunder, and moving my e-pawn was so important because my dark square bishop isn't in the attack. So then it becomes very little surprise that e6 is the move here, getting another piece in. I'm not sure what I'd play in the game, but I think it'd be hard for me to calculate that after e6 he still can't take this, because after rook here, again he has no legal moves. He has to do this here, one legal move, and when there's one legal move, it makes it easier to calculate. Check, one legal move, and bishop d3 finishes him off. I honestly have a really hard time seeing these moves for checkmate. Yeah, so I probably wouldn't see this checkmate, honestly. But that's why I can play moves like e6, which seems slow, but really actually prepare checkmate if he's going to take my knight. Okay, so that's why rook e1, e6 makes a lot of sense. And I'm still +2 in this position. He still has some stuff to deal with. It's not super easy for him. And so oftentimes, if I'm not sure what is the source of my advantage in this position, like I'm kind of confused, even though I can look at it and say, okay, this is all symmetrical, right? The pawn structure is symmetric, other than that guy's, gonna go. And, there's open lines to his king, or semi-open lines to his king. I try to see what's gonna happen if he plays some random move. So I pick some random move, a3 for example, and the computer says, okay, knight a2. So the king has to run away, and we can exploit this c3, right? Trying to make a queen, because all these squares are protected now by the knight, by the bishop, and by the knight. And so if he does something else, so e4 is there to stop the pawn from promoting, and just taking it doesn't work because of knight captures c3. And you can see that the king is very low on squares here. After king c1, bishop a3's checkmate. So there's a lot of checkmates in this position that he has to be very, very careful of. So we can't waste any time. Knight a2, followed by c3, attempting to make a queen. He has to resort to things like giving up central pawns. Notice I'm defending that square 1.5 million times, but that's what he has to do to stay alive in this position. Okay, so he's probably not going to waste any time. So let's say he plays e4 now, right? He played rook e1. That way, it's not checkmate. What about now? And in this position, My inclination was to play d captures e4. The computer much more likes playing knight captures or bishop captures. And bishop captures is like the last move that comes to my mind in this position. Because I'm like, oh, my bishop's, cutting across the position here. I don't want to get rid of it. I want to have some discoveries with it maybe in the future, or discoveries like this. But the computer's pretty adamant that taking here is great. After knight captures e4, you can't let this bishop remain here. Otherwise, you just gave a pawn for nothing. Knight e4. And now, instead of developing the bishop into the game, which basically gets rid of all the advantage after a captures b4, there's no way to recuperate the knight. We play d captures e4. That way we're threatening a knight as well as he's threatening our knight. And computer gives the line takes and takes. I think that'd be fairly straightforward to see. If he takes back, he runs into some problems after rook a1. So rook a1 is constantly an issue, and that's why we can see that whenever he takes here, he's just opening up lines to his king. And this is actually really, really kind of crazy how this happens. He doesn't want to play king d2 because bishop b4 check would pick up the rook for free. So instead, he tries king to c2, which has to give up the rook as well for free. There's no way for him to get rid of it. But here, it's an issue because you're just dropping more pawns, and you have more problems than you had before. King c2, and this. Pretty terrible. Yeah, so the position is just really, really tough in this position. And so after e4, bishop e4, knight captures, really isn't any better for him. And there was one more line where after bishop f5 initially, if he just plays e4 straight off the bat. And here again, my temptation is always to take up the line, which means take with your lowest valued piece, then your second lowest, then your third lowest. But that doesn't always apply. And in this case, knight captures e4 comes with a threat of taking here. So the knight captures, and I always get this mixed up. Yeah, the bishop captures. So it's the same position before, he just got rid of the knight here. So knight a2 check is still, on the cards. And he still can't capture here, like always. Oh, here it says he can? Wait a second. e5 is like super good here. But rook a1's not even listed. So rook a1 loses somehow, right? Rook a1 I haven't played e6 yet. That's the problem. Of course, I really have to notice the value of this move here. Of course, if you take this, then all the same tricks work with bishop captures b4, which threatens checkmate on the back rank. Yeah, this is actually super important too. So I'd be saying, oh, after I played this e-pawn, then all the stuff works, right? And the answer is it does not work. Because after king d2, if we try our bishop captures b4, he can go king e2, still defending the rook. And okay, we're still winning because we have these pawns here, which are pretty good. But his bishop's great. He's attacking a pawn. We're kind of letting him untangle, and we're trading pieces, which we don't really want to do in this position. We're not up material. We're actually down material in this position. We sacked our knight. So it's really, really important here that we don't check the king to safety. That first we actually threaten checkmate. That's mate. The only way to stop mate in this position is to play b3. But now that b3 has been played, we can do the same check. The king has to leave. And now we can take the rook for free. Rook captures d1. After bishop c4, I would just take the rook in an instant. The computer actually recommends taking here. And after takes, c3, king a1, and castles. It's always beautiful when castles is a move that threatens something very vicious. In this case, checkmate. Yeah, it's pretty nice. So there's still a lot of complexity that comes with this position. I'm still happy that I found bishop f4 or bishop f5 with the plan of checkmating and bringing more pieces in the attack. I knew we couldn't take this, but I have to pay more attention to these moves in the future. So I'm pretty happy with this game. If we look at the report of how well we did, I played 97.9%. I think my highest is like 98.3 or something because he blundered on move 8 or something. But 97.9 is not at all bad. And I did have a blunder. So if I didn't have that blunder, That would have been pretty high. That would have been really high, that game. I'm pretty happy with that. If you look at the details, it was D02, which is the London. Best move accuracy was 50%. I'm totally okay with that. 0.39% average move difference. That was definitely skewed by me blundering at the end. Not very many moves were played. You can see 90s on everything except for queen moves. Because this is just the book move, not the best move. And queen captures b6 is when we left the book. This has been Turkish Films with Daily Chess, episode 20 on 420. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and as always, I hope you stay Turkish. Good night.